All right, now it's doing it. It's always something. My wife was
Isn't it?
just on me for not paying the phone bill and not having access to internet. And I went in and looked, and I had paid the darn thing. So, okay. For some reason, this is not giving me the chat. Okay, just a second. Okay, can you still hear me?
I can.
I can't hear you now. Peachy.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. I just
let me try that again. All right, can you hear me now? No.
Can.
Okay.
I can.
Just
can you hear me?
No.
What about now?
Okay, just a minute. I have the wrong sound thing going on this computer for some reason. Just a second. Sound. All right, you can hear me through the microphone, right?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Just a second. All right, now I think I got it under control, I hope. But now, oh shoot. No, I haven't solved it yet. Just a second.
Okay.
Why does this keep happening?
Let me know if we need to drop off and come back on.
No, it's just a question of system settings. Can I still hear you now?
Yes.
Okay, I hear you now.
Okay.
So I have to turn my headphones port off and because I'm listening through the Microsoft, or I'm sorry, the Yeti mic.
Okay.
I have. And all right, this is insane because I still don't have, it's still not giving me the meeting chat, which I do need. And so what do I do here? I have to go on to my
Well, Google and Apple have not been playing nice in the sandbox over the last month.
Yeah.
Apple's been kind of like,
Okay, now I've got it. All right. I have to go back and good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm sorry for our flailing around with this technology, but for some reason, yeah, Google and Apple and maybe YouTube are not playing. YouTube and what is this? Zoom.
because Google, YouTube. So
okay, and apparently we have a satellite that just dropped off a piece of an asteroid and now is bouncing back off into space to go get another one, believe it or not. That's
rockhounds.
Huh?
Rockhounds.
Pretty good trick, really, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think it had 10 seconds once it hit the asteroid to get the sample and then leave.
I don't know if that is the case, but yes, probably. Okay.
Probably to keep the orbital trajectory calculation the same so that they don't have they can ignore the change and the hit it and come back from the same place almost.
Yeah. Okay, good morning, Kathy. Welcome. Nice to see you. And so we are just about to get going here. We are on page 374 of the three prophecies. And once again, I intended to bring images down, but I didn't do it. So we're going to have to
Imagine.
wing
Just
it.
imagine.
Imagination. Okay. All right. So the chapter is entitled The Three Prophecies, and this is a significant chapter. The date is January the 2nd, 1914, and January 22nd, 1914. So we're still 3 days shy of this being a month since Carl Jung started this book. And we've already done all of this in
Right.
1 month. And the rest of it sort of comes in relatively slowly at some point. But for now, we're just going to read this. So, the three prophecies. Wondrous things came nearer. I called my soul and asked her to dive down into the floods, whose distant roaring I could hear, or whose distant roaring I could hear. This happened on 22 January of the year 1914, as recorded in my black book. And thus she plunged into the darkness like a shot, and from the depths she called out, "Will you accept what I bring?" I will accept what you give. I do not have the right to judge or to reject. Soul. So listen, there is old armor and the rusty gear of our fathers down here, murderous leather trappings hanging from them, worm-eaten lance shafts, twisted spearheads, broken arrows, rotten shields, skulls, the bones of man and horse, old cannons, catapults, crumbling firebrands, smashed assault gear, stone spearheads, stone clubs, sharp bones, chipped arrowhead teeth, everything the battles of yore have littered the earth with. Will you accept all this? I accept it. You know better, my soul. Soul, I find painted stones, carved bones with magical signs, talismanic sayings on hanks of leather, and small plates of lead, dirty pouches filled with teeth, human hair and fingernails, timbers lashed together, black orbs, moldy animal skins, all the superstitions hatched by dark prehistory. Will you accept all this? I accept it all. How should I dismiss anything? But I find worse, fratricide, cowardly mortal blows, torture, child sacrifice, the annihilation of whole peoples, arson, betrayal, war, rebellion. Will you also accept this? Also this, if it must be. How can I judge? Soul, I find epidemics, natural catastrophes, sunken ships, razed cities, frightful feral savagery, famines, human meanness, and fear, whole mountains of fear. So shall it be, since you give it. Soul, I find the treasures of all past cultures, magnificent images of gods, spacious temples, paintings, papyrus rolls, sheets of parchment with the characters of bygone languages, books full of lost wisdom, hymns and chants of ancient priests, stories told down the ages through thousands of generations. That is an entire world, whose extent I cannot grasp. How can I accept it? Soul, but you wanted to accept everything. You do not know your limits. Can you not limit yourself? I must limit myself. Who could ever grasp such wealth? Soul, be content and cultivate your garden with modesty. I will. I see that it is not worth conquering a larger piece of the immeasurable, but a smaller one instead. A well-tended small garden is better than an ill-tended large garden. Both gardens are equally small when faced with the immeasurable, but unequally cared for. Take shears, soul, take shears and prune your trees. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for a minute. Jordan, go ahead.
I think to respond with this are two quotes from the previous passages. The first one was, "My speech is neither light nor dark, since it is the speech of someone who is growing." And we see him blindly accepting from soul, and then who could ever grasp such wealth? He starts to question, and I think then he's burying himself, because the other quote was, "He who cannot bear doubt does not bear himself." And so I think there's this milestone in the moment individuation where he's rising to the level of his own soul as ally and colleague and inhabiting himself more deeply, because he takes the doubt in. And then the last piece, "take shears and prune your trees," reminds me of something I had in my book that said forgetting is for getting. Like weeding in the garden, it opens up and makes more room for the good stuff to breathe. So I really think there's just such a power of his evolution just in these spare few paragraphs.
Right. Okay, well, let me go on, because it gets better. From the flooding darkness, the sun of the earth had brought. My soul gave me ancient things that pointed to the future. She gave me three things: the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. Okay, this is important. So I'm going to reread it again. She gave me three things: the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. If you are clever, you will understand that these three things belong together. These three mean the unleashing of chaos and its power, just as they also mean the binding of chaos. War is obvious and everybody sees it. Magic is dark and no one sees it. Religion is still to come, but it will become evident. Did you think that the horrors of such atrocious warfare could come over us? Did you think that magic existed? Did you think about a new religion? I sat up for long nights and looked ahead at what was to come, and I shuddered. Do you believe me? I am not too concerned. What should I believe? What should I disbelieve? I saw and I shuddered. But my spirit could not grasp the monstrous and could not conceive the extent of what was to come. The force of my longing languished, and powerless sank the harvesting hands. I felt the burden of the most terrible work of the times ahead. I saw where and how, but no word can grasp it. No will can conquer it. I could not do otherwise. I let it sink again into the depths. I cannot give it to you, and I can speak only of the way of what is to come. Little good will come to you from outside. What will come to you lies within yourself. But what lies there, I would like to avert my eyes, close my ears, and deny all my senses. I would like to be someone among you who knows nothing and who never saw anything. It is too much and too unexpected, but I saw it, and my memory will not leave me alone. Yet I could curtail my longing, which would like to stretch out into the future, and I return to my small garden that presently blooms, and whose extent I can measure. It shall be well tended. The future should be left to those of the future. I return I return to the small and the real for the
You may to continue.
Yep.
The future should be left to those of the future. I return to the small and the real, for this is the great way, the way of what is to come. I return to my simple reality, to my undeniable and most minuscule being, and I take a knife and hold court over everything that has grown without measure and goal. Forests have grown around me, winding plants have climbed up me, and I am completely covered by endless proliferation. The depths are inexhaustible. They give everything. Everything is as good as nothing. Keep a little and you have something to recognize and know your ambition and your greed together, your craving to cultivate it, grasp it, make it serviceable, influence it, master it, order it, to give it interpretations and meanings is extravagant. It is lunacy, like everything that transcends its boundaries. How can you hold that which you are not? Would you really like to force everything which you are not under the yoke of your wretched knowledge and understanding? Remember that you can know yourself, and with that, you know enough. But you cannot know others and everything else. Beware of knowing what lies beyond yourself, or beware of knowing what lies beyond yourself, or else your presumed knowledge will suffocate the life of those who know themselves. A knower may know himself. That is his limit. With a painful slice, I cut off what I pretended to know about what lies beyond me. I excise myself from the cunning interpretive loops that I gave to what lies beyond me. And my knife cuts even deeper and separates me from the meanings that I conferred upon myself. I cut down to the marrow until everything meaningful falls from me, until I am no longer as I might seem to myself, until I know only that I am without knowing what I am. I want to be poor and bare, and I want to stand naked before the inexorable. I want to be my body and its poverty. I want to be from the earth and live its law. I want to be my human animal and accept all its frights and desires. I want to go through the wailing and the blessedness of the one who stood alone with a poor, unarmed body on the sunlit earth, a prey of his drives and of the lurking wild animals, who was terrified by ghosts and dreaming of distant gods, who belonged to what was near and was enemy to the far off, who struck fire from stones and whose herds were stolen by unknowable powers that also destroyed the crops of his fields, and who neither knew nor recognized, but who lived by what lay at hand and received by grace what lay far off. He was a child and unsure, yet full of certainty, weak and yet blessed with enormous strength. When his God did not help, he took another. And when this one did not help either, he castigated him. And behold, the gods helped one more time. Thus, I discard everything that was laden with meaning, everything divine and devilish with which chaos burdened me. Truly, it is not up to me to prove the gods and the devils and the chaotic monsters, to feed them carefully, to warily drag them with me, to count and name them, and to protect them with belief against disbelief and doubt. A free man knows only free gods and devils that are self-contained and take effect on account of their own force. If they fail to have an effect, that is their own business, and I can remove this burden from myself. But if they are effective, they need neither my protection nor my care, nor my belief. Thus you may wait quietly to see whether they work. But if they do, be clever, for the tiger is stronger than you. You should be able to cast everything from you. Otherwise, you are a slave. Even if you are the slave of a god, life is free and chooses its way. It is limited enough, so do not pile up more limitation. Hence, I cut away everything confining. I stood here and lay the riddlesome multifariousness of the world. And there lay the riddlesome multifariousness of the world.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute, because we've got a ton of stuff in here. And I think it bears discussion at this point.
I think so, because that last little snippet of a paragraph will have just as much too. That's a good place to stop there.
Yeah. Okay, so the three prophecies are the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. And so what does that mean to you?
He's dispelling with belief. So he's taking the gift, but he's removing the religion. He's entering the soul, which is the magic, the dark of magic, midnight ocean. And then the war piece, he's even starting to discard that, because he's coming to keep the enemies closer, so to speak, as the gift rather than the war. And I think he opens up those three prophecies in these passages that we just went over. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, I think I'm probably a bit more mundane in the way I view it. This is January 22nd, 1914. So it's 7 months before the beginning, or 6 months before the beginning of World War I. Obviously, Jung's psyche was really burdened by what was going on in Europe at that time, I think. And he simply had not realized it yet. He was oblivious to the collective unconscious, as human beings have always been since time immemorial. It was only at this time that Jung himself discovered the collective unconscious. And so, and one of the reasons I was talking with you earlier about confluence is that we're going to explore the collective unconscious at confluence in a couple of different ways, or at least 3 different ways, so that we who attend have an appreciation of it moving forward. But I think that Jung was, he was an erudite man. He was extremely well read since childhood. He knew all of these horrors that have gone by in humanity and the human psyche. And he was well aware of the awful things that humans could do. And he was certainly aware of religion and magic as well. And so in this passage, it's really a profound passage, because he's asking his soul, bring me something up from the depths. And this is what she brings him, these 3 things. And she brings them to him. She lays them at his feet, basically, as in a very complex way, so that you can really see all the facets of all 3 items. And it really, in a way, starts to distill for Jung, it seems to me, what it was that he was about, what he would, he was up until this time, January 22nd, 1914. He's been at it for 3.5 weeks, and basically he's just been taking notes furiously on what was going on in his head. And And here, I think we see a turning point where he really sees how complex his life is going to be, because essentially all of his major collected works come from this sort of moment. I would think that, previously there are other works in his oeuvre, in his collected works, including his studies on how quickly people respond to words and that sort of thing. But that was purely scientific study. That was not him grokking what it was he was about. He was simply following the scientific method at that point. And to the extent, as he was a professional psychiatrist, he was practicing in the mundane, rationalistic way of practicing psychiatry. But here we see kind of an aha moment where he's got all these collective unconscious pressures upon him, sitting there in Zurich, in Kusnacht, and he feels them. He feels them very viscerally, and he has this moment where his soul just feeds back to him all these things, and of course, all of them, for the most part, come out of his earlier study. And he's in, let's see, in 2014, he's at this point of the year, he's 38 and a half years old. Okay, so he's had plenty of time to study, get his doctorate, his MD, and also to see how patients at the Bergholzli were reacting to the psychiatry of that time. And he realizes that there's something more, but he doesn't know what. And I think he's getting it right here. He's seeing that there is something more, that the not only, of course, he knew about the unconscious, but he is kind of seeing how the unconscious is really the drive.
You froze right there at the driver.
Complexes are focal and nodal points of psychic life, which we would not wish to do without. Indeed, they should not be missing, for otherwise psychic activity would come to a fatal standstill. Okay, that's a very interesting quote. So, but it's from Collected Work 6, so it's a little bit later in his collected works, paragraph 925, just for anybody that wants to look it up.
And just so you had froze right before you said the driver that he found. And I just wanted to open up just one little 3-part thing where the war, the magic, and the religion, starting backwards and going back to it, the religion bringing community, bringing people together. So the war, the magic, he starts with, there is old armor and the rusty gear of our fathers down here, murderous leather trappings, etc., etc. Death. Then I find painted stones, carved bones, and magical signs, talismanic sayings. There's the magic. It's starting to come back to life. The resurrection from death to life, from destruction to creation, is starting to occur. And then I find the treasures of all past cultures, magnificent images of gods, and so spacious temples, paintings, papyrus rolls. So then he's coming into the religion, but he's looking at it in the past but as that's the numinous life he's coming into.
Yeah. And right. So let's just talk it through for a minute. So wars, the misery of war, humanity has known war since forever, right? Ever since we started to move, ever since our species started to move out of the Olduvai Gorge in Central Africa, we have been advancing and making advances. And maybe there wasn't so much need for war before I think it's 8 millennia, until 8 millennia BC. Okay, in other words, the feminine culture, agriculture, and so on was always just fine, because in the Fertile Crescent they had fertile lands. They found that they could plant things and make things, and so that development of humanity worked out fine, because it was always, oh geez, I need a plot for my son to raise his family on. Why don't you just use that piece of ground over there? I mean, we see it in Japanese history where the majority of Japanese are descended from Altaic people who came from Central Asia, and they came down through the Korean Peninsula, and then about the time of Christ, they moved into Kyushu, which is one of the main islands of Japan, and they stayed there for about 400 years. They didn't, they were there, and they expanded out again through this agricultural stuff, and then they started to move on to Honshu, which is the main island of Japan, and it took them another 800 years to get to Osaka, where Osaka and Kyoto are today. And it took another 400 years, I think, that's about right, 400 years to get to Tokyo, okay? And so now we've got 400 years in Kyushu, 800 to move to Osaka, that's 1200, and another 400 years to get to Tokyo. And north of Tokyo is pretty forbidding lands. It's the Japanese Alps, and it gets very cold up there. And I'm not talking yet about the Ainu people who came down from the north, but the people who came up from the south, they got to Tokyo, and that was about the end of the fertile areas of Japan. And so what happened was, around the 16th century, the shoguns the daimyo of Japan, there were 64 families who had built up sort of local feudal headquarters. They built their own castles and so on. And in 1600 is when the conflict between the North and the South became too intense. And in that year of 1600 was the Battle of Kasumigaseki, which is the largest hand-to-hand combat battle in the history of the world. It's said that about 30,000 heads were taken between the two sides, and the significance of Kasumigaseki is that it is a pass through the mountains. There's a mountain range that cuts right across Japan that is not easy to cross, that separates north and south, but there is a very narrow pass at Kasumigaseki, and so people can get through it. And so it was the battle for that pass, because if you controlled that pass, then you could get your people through and get more land on the other side. Originally coming up from the south, but then pushing back from the north. And so what happened at Kasumigaseki was the armies of the north won the battle. Okay, and the armies of the south, which were centered at Osaka Castle, were not victorious, and that began the Tokugawa shogunate, which was the leadership of Japan, and meanwhile the emperor was always there hanging out over on the side somewhere, but the armies were fighting back and forth, and they developed this whole army thing of Bushido, of honorable death and all that sort of stuff as part of that evolution. But the significance of the reason I'm telling this story in a rather complex way is because it's like what was happening throughout the world. Okay, the world was basically our oyster, our human oyster, before 8000 BC. And it was just a question of going next door and starting to cultivate that land before then. But after then, it became a matter of battling to control land, and as a way to support your society versus the society in the next place. And so this then led to some, very big human fights over the years. There were little fights at first, just between tribes maybe, but those fights got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it was the human way to fight. And we all have an evolutionary natural instinct to fight or flight, either fight or leave. And when leaving was no longer an option, really, then you had to fight, and it got bigger and bigger until now we get to the point where we can no longer do it. Okay, if we do it, we destroy the planet, we destroy ourselves if we keep doing it. So we have to settle out these eruptions, and we have to learn, we have to evolve, we have to wake up and realize that those kinds of fights are over. We are so done with that. And yet, I'm not saying there won't be wars in the future, but I'm saying that we as human beings generally can recognize that the misery of war is a useless thing. It's not getting us what we need, and we need a new way of living and thinking together. Because if we don't, just in climate change, we have many countries that are terrible polluters. The obvious ones are China and Russia, China and India, but also Western Europe is a terrible polluter. And oh, by the way, the United States of America is a terrible polluter. And this clever technology we developed of flying, it's wonderful that we've been able to get around the world so quickly and easily during the last 120 years. But the issue is we just can't do it anymore, because we're just polluting our environment. And we, if you look at the image of the atmosphere of the Earth, we just have a very thin atmosphere. It's 20 miles. So we can't live even at that altitude. We can't live above 10,000 feet without taking our lives in our hands. And Jordan can probably tell us about having a cabin at 9,000 feet where I can't even go to those places because I can't breathe.
Well, it's like my sweet spot's 9,100. I'm most energetic at 9,100. 7,000 where I am now is great, but it's funny about above 10,000 tree lines, like 10,2, 10,8, or 11,100, depending.
Yeah.
And I used to going up 14ers. As we got towards tree line, I used to tell people, look, this is nature saying stuff doesn't live past this point. You are a visitor. Let's go up and let's come back, because the trees don't grow. So that's
Right.
nature even saying, So
Right.
here's the
And
top.
so, it's literally time for us as human beings to grow up, to get past our adolescence of thinking that everybody can have a 2-car garage and aspire to a swimming pool and all that jazz. We may have gotten it like that for a while in the United States, but even here it's not possible anymore. And if everybody in the world had everything that we've accumulated in the United States, then we would be as a species, we'd be in serious trouble. And so, and the earth would fight back as she is. Okay. And so we have to start learning how to live in concert with our planet. And we have to get out of these old mindsets. But nonetheless, this is one of the fundamental things that's in our psyche. And this is what Jung's soul brings him. Okay, so the second thing it brings him is the magic, the darkness of magic. And do you want to comment on that for a minute, Jordan?
Well, first off, I think I'll comment back to the war piece, because yes, that fight, flight, freeze, eat, sex, etc. primal piece is definitely there. I mean, the amygdala, little reptile in the middle of the brain, AMYGDALA. I don't say the whole word anymore. It's, pardon my language, it's that bitch Amy, and she's not always in your best interest. So to me, what's interesting is that becomes a juvenile, I'm subject to these fight, flight, freeze, sex, food, desire pieces, except you grow up and you individuate. And what happens is then you can have discernment and this discretion to say, well, no, right now, yes, that's an impulse coming from inside, but I have an internal affect regulation where that's not in my best interest. So I shall stay the course. And what happens then is that's when I think Viktor Frankl's quote comes so much to bear, that there is a space between stimulus and response. And my level of psychological and personal development inhabits and resides in that space. So instead of the warring, which is reactionary and territorial and tribalist, it goes too much into the religious and political devotion, which precludes the magic we're about to talk about, images, paintings, and a devotion to aesthetics and beauty and things that are generative rather than having to self-destroy things. So I think that then is a lead in from, we don't need the war piece. The war is substitute creative process, substitute aesthetics, and instead of religious and political devotion, I think in simple, it's not the truth of the word in any literature or any religion. It's really about the majesty of its song. And I think the majesty of the song of what is happening in those things is important, but not my song is better than yours. So I think the dignity and difference of the majesty of aesthetics and the song can bring that to bear. So as you're coming back, I mean, preamble to that, I mean, I think James Hillman in Terrible Love of War mentioned that, Western culture is so devoid of aesthetics that it clings too tightly to its religious and political devotion. But the last point I made there before you came back, it's not about the words in Islam. It's not about the words in Christianity. It's about the majesty of the song and that aesthetics. And so as you were leaving, my new fun piece, and pardon my language, but instead of the amygdala, I don't call it amygdala anymore. It's that little reptile inside, fight, flight, freeze, sex, etc. Now I call it that bitch Amy, and she's not in your best interest half the time. And I think the war becomes that reactionary piece of, I have this function inside. I'm terrified. I must go fight. Well, no, I have internal affect regulation that, no, thank you. I will stay the course here, dealing with generative things and beauty, and I will not lose my discretion to fall prey to that fight, flight, freeze. I'm going to stop and listen and engage. And there's an aesthetics, I think, to this majesty of the song of how do you engage? And then my song is no better than yours. And I think comes back to dignity and difference, which is a more adult concept of not just can we all get along, can we listen to the intensity of the edges of our cultures and learn about each other?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we have to turn back toward each other. We've been turned away from each other for a million years, probably, but we have to turn back toward each other and see what we can learn from each other and solve these problems together, because we're not going to win by pure dominance, because anybody that's tried to occupy a country knows that unless you're a benevolent dictator, you're never going to resolve the problems. And this was the brilliance of Douglas MacArthur, actually, because he was a brilliant general, of course, but when he went into Japan, he basically went in as a substitute emperor, but he did not do away with the emperor. He left the Japanese emperor in place, and he made it clear to the Japanese leaders that we were going to leave, and they had to build a new society and a government that could be acceptable in the world. And that took 7 years, but it wasn't a forever. It wasn't an occupation like the kingdom of Jerusalem, where the Europeans controlled Jerusalem for 200 years. And then finally Saladin came in and cut them all up and said, no, you're not doing that. Right. MacArthur made it clear that we were there to go on with a new world after World War II. And,
well, I think that's a great example, because I think, so many people playing King of the Mountain, look at me, look at me, look at me. Right. Well, it's not that it's lonely at the top. It's that you're disconnected at the top. It's only you, which is, I don't want to label it, but at the same time, what I find is, well, who are you trying to impress? Mom or dad? Grow up. You don't, and my favorite joke is that validation is just for parking. So why don't you connect instead?
Yeah. And as I have a lot of experience with Japan, I lived there 8 years, and the first time I was there in high school, it was 1962, which was only 17 years after the war, and only 10 years after the end of the occupation, so-called. And I really, at that time, as a middle school student and high school student, I never really appreciated what the war meant per se.
Mhm.
But when I went back, I had to do business in Hiroshima, and I went there with great concern about what, my own safety and what would happen there when I started to deal with them. And I found that they are the most receptive, the most gentle and outgoing people in Japan. Absolutely. They're um, they're only the only thing that they expect of you as a foreigner is that you um, visit the Peace Museum, the museum about the atomic bomb and what it meant to the Japanese afterward. They want you to go see that and to understand what it all meant. But there were no recriminations. That became my best client in Japan, which was Mazda, and I really enjoyed going there. And so humanity can change pretty quickly. Now that was 32 years after the war that I was starting to go there in business, in the early 1980s. But it was a interesting time, and I don't think I would have survived if the Japanese people hadn't committed themselves to changing the way they were during the war. Okay, but let's move on from the misery of war to
To
the
the magic,
magic,
yeah.
to the magic and the darkness of magic. And basically there are a number of books. Is it Israel Regardie who wrote the book about magic?
Yeah, when he was like 23, was
Right.
he?
And
Yeah.
and this was in the late 19th century, about 1880 or something like that he wrote
Mhm.
this book. And basically what he said was that magic is magic is a trick, basically, and you see it in various ways. When Jordan reads the Tarot every day, in Taos, New Mexico, for the public, and for thousands of years, or at least several hundred years since Tarot developed, um, people thought it was magic because and by magic I mean um, woo magic, unexplainable magic,
Mhm.
that that um, that some people had control of. And yet, and Jordan's going to have to, is the expert, so he's going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but as it's developed over several hundred years now, what is true about the Tarot is that it is true for everyone. When I first started to get into Tarot, I learned fairly quickly that I could enter an auditorium with 1,000 people in the room, take a deck of Tarot cards and throw them across the stage, and just go through and do a reading based on the cards that popped up in my throw. And everybody in the room would think that I had done a reading for them. And you can either perceive that as magic, as uncanny magic, that woo woo, wow, Skip is a magic guy, he can make everybody think this for an hour, or you can appreciate what it does. And what it does is it touches archetypal energies in your unconscious that everybody has. And when Jordan does a tarot reading, he doesn't know. He may intuitively guess or unconsciously guess something about the individual that's in front of them by their attire or what have you. But when he does the reading, he really has no idea how it affects you, but he knows that it will. Do you want to expand on that?
Mm-hmm. And beyond the general piece where any card can apply to any situation, there are no bad cards. And if you don't waste trouble, don't shy away from it. Don't hide under the Cretaceous sunflower kind of thing. What happens to me is my purpose, and the way I implement it is I take people on a road trip to help them learn how to get their own driver's license to navigate the generative power that is alive but undiscovered in their psyche. And they always already know it. A lot of times there's a confirmation, but then I pick up on things, and often the eyes well up, and it's not tears of joy and it's not tears of sadness. There's this spilling some beauty, the mess you don't have to clean up. And what happens is they understand they have a full vessel. They've just always been taught to have to prove to use it. And instead of permission, they step in. Yeah. And I have them engage. And one of the biggest pieces I find is that they already knew, but they had not passed the passage of giving themselves permission that this is my life, my way. And the images being generative, I think, align with and synchronize with the archetypal energies that they already know. And for example, all four queens, the energy and the wisdom of the ages lives within. And that's one of the reasons so many philosophers and artists and everybody throughout time work with similar ideas. But like T.S. Eliot said, there's nothing new, but everything must be original. Meaning you expressing the song of your voice your way. And so really what I'm in service to, my kintsugi of self, tarot and astrology for well-being. But I think that well-being is not me silver plattering people. It's getting them to go ahead and it's usually a 3 millimeter step. Everyone has it. And they just have to kind of, in a sense, lean into the dissonance. Maybe the feet don't even move. It's not even a whole step. And they're already there. And so I feel honored that I'm in a place where I've used it, I think, for long enough to where I don't need to know why. It's about knowing deeply so that I can help facilitate people to engage and manifest their own numinous experiences, but in a way that becomes the heart of the matter in their actions. And so they don't leave my mind was blown, and 10 minutes later, can't remember a thing I said. I've had so many compliments in the last year about, you speak an analogy and metaphor, but I got it all because you showed me how to apply it. Right. And I think that's where tarot is so helpful, because I think the heart of the matter is nonverbal and visual, and it lands as the dance partner of thinking, right, which is talking, but not hammering the heart of the matter out. Where philosopher last year at my table, and he started talking and went into it's like a New York Times polysyllabic watercolor mess of words that was wonderfully articulate and sounded great and beautiful. And at the end, he said, "So what do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, I think you just made way too much sense to be worth a damn." And and he said, "How so?" I said, "Well, remember back to why you got into philosophy." And his eyes went wide like a 4-year-old with ice cream. And he bolted up out of the chair and off he went. And his wife leans over. He didn't pay. I said, don't even bring it up. Let him run. Just don't ask him any questions about it. Mind your curiosity. You're not being abandoned. He just had a numinous experience. I'm honored that I facilitated or just was here when that happened.
Right.
But the next day he walks up kind of mousily. He goes, I forgot to pay. I said, no, you didn't. You had a numinous experience, and I would be negligent and evil if I interrupted that.
Sure.
So I think that goes into the tarot a bit.
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example of a kind of magic too, because what this magic does is it connects people with their unconscious, and they don't even have to know that that's what's happening. And I'll give you an example of something that happened to me this week, where I work for the public schools as a special educator with children who are misbehaving. They basically haven't grown up, and they're having difficulty making the connection from childhood to adulthood. And we have a method of noting when they misbehave, so that we can take action and take them out of the classroom and work with them. And but anyway, this past week I was assigned to substitute for the English teacher in three of her classes, and our classes are very small. They're right now they're only 3 to 5 kids, and I have one class that has only 2 kids in it. And it so happened that on this particular day when I was substituting, I had one class with only one student, and this student was the kid that's acting out the worst in our school right now. And we keep track of how many times they do things that are antisocial, let's say, to be kind. And that day he had committed 9 offenses in the day that other teachers had reported. So there was a list of them, right? And he had been running up and down the hall. He'd run into other people's classrooms and disrupt the class, etc. And so I was sort of worried about going in to the classroom with him and being alone with him. But when he came in and he sat down over in the corner of the classroom, we have these big butcher block square tables that are about 6 feet on a side, with high chairs next to them, high stools. And so he had sat down over at one of those. And so I took the substitute plan over, and I just said, okay, well, here's your assignment from your teacher. And the assignment was to read an article about cyberbullying, and then basically write a brief analysis of it in the who, what, when, where, why, how basis. Okay, this is an 8th grader. And so I gave it to him, and of course the article itself interested him because he'd heard about bullying and cyberbullying. So he did read it, and he did fill out the paperwork, and he did it in about 10 minutes. He's a very smart kid, and he did it in about 10 minutes. The teacher had expected it to take 35 to 40 minutes, and in fact it did in other classes. But for this kid, he got right on it. He did it, boom, all done. So then I said to him, well, I'm talking about doing some mural painting in this school, And in order to prepare for that, I'm teaching this technique of painting. So we call it Rocky, and we're going to do it at Confluence as a group thing, because it's a very good way to activate the collective unconscious. And so just to give people an example, I'm just going to put a Rocky on the screen that I've done, just so people understand what I'm talking about. So basically what you do is you put color down randomly, and then you draw boundaries everywhere there's a color boundary. Everywhere you can identify where the colors change, you draw a line. Okay, so this is one of my lesser beautiful ones, but what I've found about this is that it's a terrific meditation technique. And if you just start drawing these lines, these boundaries, very often you get images. But it just takes me away. It takes me into my psyche immediately, instantaneously. And so, it becomes an excellent way to connect with my unconscious. It's the best meditation technique that I've discovered in my lifetime. And I've done a lot of meditation over the years, trying to use mantras and that sort of thing. And what it does is, in a group, and I experimented with this in a group this year. So early in the spring, I did it with elementary school students, and this is what we came up with, and this is what we're going to try to do at Confluence as well. And so on a 24-foot long piece of paper, 42 inches wide, we had every student in the school put something down on this Rocky, and then to start to identify images that they see within it. And this is, I'll show you a little better picture of what we did here, just a sec.
What I love about that technique is that, art in nature, but with Rocky, you're discovering the art in your nature,
right,
by going through to outline.
Right. And so here was the final product. And we had 600 students in this school from pre-K up through 5th grade participate in this. They put the color down, and then they started to draw the lines. And then I had them start to identify images within this. And over a period of several days, they identified 305 different things that they had seen. Now, the reason I mention this is I'm telling this story about what happened to me last week. So I carry a few grounds with me that are just small ones, small rocky grounds that just have random color. And I showed him what I was doing and asked him if he'd like to try it. And so he said, yes, he'd like to try it. And on a day that this child was otherwise just a terror of the school and got 9 offenses noted against him, he was totally silent for 35 minutes. He got started into the Rocky, and click, he connected with his unconscious, and he didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to resist in any way. And in fact, I gave him my gel pen at the end of the class because he had been so good. And the next day was taken out of school, out of his classes entirely as a punishment for the other 9 things that he had done on that particular day. But in my classroom, he was totally silent. And that's what we have to do with people to help them connect with their source, to connect with their unconscious, and to help move our whole society along. And it's that sort of thing that's going to help that child. Okay.
Well, yeah, and I think you got him to, I mean, instead of the status quo, please be still and sit quietly and be a good little boy.
No, I didn't say that.
No. What I'm saying is instead of that, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Still, calm intensity of masterful silence within.
Yep.
You showed him how to navigate his own world inside so he could navigate out here. And then he's quiet in his own way, like no other. And I think the whole, sit down and be quiet and be good. You're messing up the class.
Forget that.
Yeah, forget that, because that's a superficial goal that is, people are trying to jump to the end where you got to do what you did. Show him how to tap the unconscious as the fuel tank of the gas in his car inside, and he can navigate out here just fine. In fact, his octane may be higher than others, and that may be the problem.
Well, yeah, it is.
Not exhausting.
He's way too smart for this school, but he has to apply himself, obviously. And so I'm not saying the job is done with this particular child, but in terms of magic, okay, my colleagues in this school, if they could be a fly on the wall and watch that period as compared to the whole rest of the day, when this kid was committing 9 violations that were worth noting, and I'm sure there were 25 that weren't worth noting, for them, it would have looked like magic. Okay. And that's what magic is. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah. And I think the Western education system is set up to honor the average of the average and leave the high and the low behind. And that's just a way to make an average, but it's not the way to make an educational system. And I think what's interesting is, again, back to the war piece, it's trying to find this detente, status quo, alleged calm. It's just the storm stopped for a little bit. It's going to come back. Yeah. Nothing was solved, but you resolved with him a way and a methodology for him to live his life and not have an internal civil war going on inside. He could let it out, but he let it out in ways where he's going to build value. He can build beauty.
Yeah. So going back to Israel Regardie for a minute, one of his dicta was, and I think this is very accurate, that prophets are actually people who know what's happened in the past, who know what, if you do umpty, then the following is going to happen. And you can be a prophet if you know history, and if you understand human behavior, you can actually predict an outcome. And so, give you an example. I was in a social studies class with all Black, I guess 10th or 11th graders last winter. And it was right before the senatorial election between Senator Warnock and who was the football player he was running against. But
escaping me.
It'll come to me. Anyway,
I don't usually call roll on them in a way. I remember their names. It's not really
but a week before that election, I said, I can't, even though all the pundits are saying that it's equally matched and and the results are going to be equal, I could predict not only what the result would be, but also how big of a margin it would be. And it was basically very, very simple, but knowing history, I could look at the Republican rolls, and you can do this for next year's election too. You can look at the Republican rolls and the Democratic rolls, and even though the results appear to be the same, in point of fact, there's only 27% of Americans who are Republican. And so even if most Republicans are in favor of our former president, it's only about 54%. So that's, roughly about 14 or 15% of the electorate. It's not a big bunch of the electorate. And so you can predict very easily what will happen in the general election next year, notwithstanding these primaries, because they all have their own dynamics. But anyway, that's what I mean by a prophet being able to predict based on history, not based on polling, but based on history and based on knowing some demographics. So anyway, I want to go into the third item, which is the gift of religion. And I know that, there are a lot of people that are probably listening to this who are down on religion and think that they've been selling us a bill of goods for thousands of years, and we shouldn't pay attention to them, and I think that that's wrong. I've come to the conclusion that that's wrong. And Jung himself said that religions are psychotherapeutic systems on the grandest scale. So there are systems that have developed over thousands of years. They work for a large part of the population. They create a community, as we know, and where people aren't misusing religion. Of course, religions can be easily misused as long as we don't understand their purpose and their method. What they do is they provide what psychotherapy does for you, or what psychiatry will do for you. If you follow paragraph 639 of volume 10.
You froze there, right? When you said psychiatry, psychology, if you follow, and then I think then it froze.
Okay. If you follow these religions, they support mental health. And as Dr. Jung said in paragraph 639 of volume 10 of the collected works, which is called Civilization in Transition, in that paragraph, he says that these are psychotherapeutic systems on the grandest scale. And so priests and rabbis and mullahs have always been dealing with people's mental health. Now, sometimes they got off the beam when they started to use religion as a method of gaining power. And so there are dark sides of religion as well, of course, and have been since the beginning. But if you take the normal version of basically any religion, it will help you with your mental health. And so, I find that even if I just listen to a portion of my mother-in-law's Christian ceremony every week on the internet, I recognize that certain parts of the liturgy still connect with me and make me feel better, even though I know that there's no wooey woo thing that's making me feel better. It's making me feel better within myself.
And I think your points, it's wonderful too, because it speaks back to this, get into the magic and get into the religion piece,
Right.
because it's in doses, and it helps us dose ourselves with more of ourselves instead of from some external deity kind of thing. And what's interesting to me, my joke of, Nietzsche, of course, says if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back. And then I go, but don't get stuck there, because if you gaze too long, the abyss, in the totality of its existential nothingness, will lean back and say it's really rude to stare, which basically means, yeah, gaze, but don't stay there. But I think the funnier way to put it is, the number 8 walks into its therapist's office, and the therapist says, well, go ahead and lie down. And then the number 8's eyebrows go up and said, oh, no way. That means I'll be here forever, because he turned into infinity. Yeah. So it's like, don't get stuck in those things, but you experience them. Just like there's a religion or a church of you and that boy who engaged in Rocky. That was the temple of him in himself. Yeah. That he turned on the faucet and he was able to utilize himself rather than have the terror and the agitation and the irritation of having all these other sensory things that had no bearing on what he found of value.
Yeah. Yeah, and he has no idea what he did find, right?
And that's better. I mean, the reasons are unreasonable.
What he knows is that I gave him a rocky ground and he worked on it for 35 minutes, and then I gave him a pen and he left the place. Okay.
I don't remember the artist who said it, but it goes right along with that, is once you discover and are able to navigate the inner workings of the psyche, don't only stay with the inner workings of the psyche, immediately start making things of beauty. And I think what happens is that's then engaging and turning. And so you just paid the water bill, so let's turn on the faucet.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, absolutely. And so I would never diss any religion today. I thought, as the Dalai Lama himself has noted, we've gone beyond religion in one way, in the sense that we no longer think of it as a magic thing, but as a supernatural thing, let's say. It's a natural thing. It's a natural thing that has evolved. And it's psychotherapy in the grandest scheme of things, and helps, billions of people around the world in very many ways. And we require that. That's evident. I mean, we would have way more chaos if we didn't have people who were taking care of, who were following religious paths, whatever they are. And so what I say is they're all true, right? They're all true.
Well, yeah, I mean, James Hillman would, back you right up. The Christianity and Islam, we search for the jihad all through the Quran, and no, we don't find it. We find their words. And the thing is, it's not about the words in either Islam or Christianity. It's about the majesty of the song. Right. And they're singing the same thing. It's just different style, different culture, different, issuing place. But I think the majesty of the song, which comes back to aesthetics, it comes back to art, to Rocky, I think I don't know who said this hundreds of years ago, probably. Art drives culture. Technology simply supports it. And I just add, like a toothpick after dinner. It's like technology is just a a tool, but the
Well,
art drives culture.
Well, here's the way I've come to think about it lately, as we've been doing Confluence, is that we're all creators, and it's our responsibility to create our own life. Okay, and the art of creating your life can be different for everyone, and certainly is different for everyone. But we have to have that attitude of being a creator. Um, and Richard makes a comment about artwork. He says, I used to do artwork until I realized it's all vanity of the earth. Well, I think of it in a different way, Richard, which is that the work that I'm now doing, and I spent an hour on Iraqi this morning, and I'm not doing it for vanity. I'm only doing it for myself. I mean, I'm going to bring a portfolio of my own Rocky work to Confluence, for example. But if anybody sees any of my work that they like and want, I'm not going to have the vanity of asking them to pay me for it. I'm going to give it to them. It's free for the taking, because what I'm doing with Rocky has become my meditation technique, and it's personal to me, and I don't see it as something that, you know, supports my life in any way. I mean, I'm a school teacher now, and so you know, I was a business executive, but in a couple of weeks I'm going to be 77 years old, so I'm a little old to be gallivanting around the world trying to create new businesses, and nobody would believe me anyway with my white hair. And so I've gone back to my roots, because when I was in college, I decided to take all the education courses so that I could be a school teacher if I ever needed to. It would be a backup for me. And it turned out that I never did it until last September, when I began as a substitute last year. I substituted all last year. This year I have a Unit 1 teaching position as a special educator, and I found that I, number one, really like it. Number two, I'm incredibly impressed with the people who do this work, especially in my school, where we get all the behavior problems of all the other schools in the school district, which is, we have 125 schools, and I think, what is it? Well, we have 69 elementary schools of 125. You can add it up, and we have 12 high schools. So the balance is middle school. So we get all the middle school hard to handle children in our school. That's what we deal with. And it's a very special school. And the kids go back to their home schools after maybe a quarter with us, and they are changed. They achieve their maturity very often. And I had one student at the beginning of the year who I really liked, and I'm saying to myself, why is this kid here? And he says, oh, I'm going to be in this school until I'm until I finish 9th grade, which is our top grade. And 2 weeks later, his mother put him back in his regular school, and in my opinion, he was ready to go. And so somehow it all worked. I guess.
Well, that reminds me of summers in college. For several years I taught martial arts to underprivileged kids in an extension program. where they were all scholarship to come live and repeat the courses they failed through the year.
Mhm.
And I remember the dean saying, "Now, Jordan, why are you going to teach?" He said this. I said, "Why are you going to teach these street urchins martial arts and how to fight?" And I
Mhm.
said, "First off, you're a little judgy on the first part where the urchins. I think they're a little more evolved than that. But two, have you seen them fight? They're really sloppy. And if I teach them how to do it better, they'll probably do it less." And it didn't fail. Everyone in the martial arts class went up 2-letter grades. And
Oh,
some
yeah.
of them started mentoring back. And what I found was, I mean, they were street smart and they knew they didn't have an outlet. But the thing is, I didn't allow them to talk and at
Mhm.
all. But the thing is, they had the action
Yeah.
and the movement and actually also the community. And the ones that had B's were now not getting A's. They were getting A's and turning around to help mentor their friends. And hey, I see you're having a problem. Maybe try it like this. And
Yeah.
what happened is they started to fight their own boredom. And
Yeah.
they actually began to engage more honestly, more joyously and more irreverently. Because
Yeah.
then instead of things wrong, they were witty beyond belief. And so the high octane was put somewhere, like you're doing
Yeah.
with that kid.
Well, I thank you for reminding me about martial arts, because I've really seen that in young people. When they get into the martial arts, they become more spiritual, more attentive, and more aware. And that is something that we should be doing at our school. I really think we should.
It burns
And
off the fumes. It burns off the inner fumes too, so that you can get to the good stuff. I mean, it literally,
absolutely,
when they say
absolutely.
harden the body and, train to failure. Well, the thing is, what that's doing is getting rid of all the trash,
Yep,
and you
yep,
get to the gold pretty quickly.
yep. That's a good point. And it so happens that I have enough experience with martial arts over my lifetime so that I know that it's the right thing. If we get, I don't know if it's judo or aikido, maybe aikido is something like that.
Aikido, it's the Aikido harnesses the whole power of the whole universe, and it's actually small circles without a sword, just like you have a sword. But it looks really graceful. It's pretty rough and tumble, but it doesn't do so much harm as it does. It ties knots. And I love that the calligraphy piece that you brought up, I don't know, a couple of years ago, the character. And hey, Jordan, which direction is this going? And oh, it's going that way because this is a guy who's doing this. And most people think it's going the other way, but it's a martial arts pose in a calligraphy character.
Now, Dionysius makes this comment to Richard: Islam strips the divinity of Christ. I'm surprised to see you uphold them. Well, let me make a comment.
It strips nothing and has nothing to do with Christ.
Well, actually, that's not true either, because Christ is seen as a prophet in Islam, and about a third of the Quran, I would say roughly, relates the entire Christian Judaic story, beginning with Abraham.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make a guru out of Christ, which is...
Yeah, it doesn't make a guru out of Christ, but Christ is seen as a prophet, and the whole story of the birth of Christ and all those things are there in Islam, very much so. And so, this is the point. We don't have to get into these tit for tat about, Christianity doesn't do this, or Islam doesn't do that, or Jainism doesn't do this, and blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on. And we have to, that's the religions that are over here not talking to each other. And
I think within that too, just even in the word guru, there are two U's in the word guru, which means you should think twice before handing yourself over,
right.
and to
And
one thing.
and so the how the question is, how do we face each other and work together? Okay.
Yeah.
And for example, in my community, all the religious leaders in the Annapolis community, they get together for lunch once a month, but then they go back and they don't change anything about the perspective. And I have a beautiful chapel 2 miles from here, which I love, the Naval Academy Chapel, and I used to go to it, but then I found all these Navy chaplains who have become fundamentalists, and they're railing against Islam and blah 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 blah. And I'm saying, wait, whoa, that's not
Actually,
me.
not very Christian of you.
Not very
Not very
Christian
Christian
of them. And it's just it's really objectionable what they have done to the chaplain corps. They've really, the fundamentalists have really taken over the chaplain corps of the Navy, and
also hypocritical.
Absolutely. And so anyway,
Like preach love and then go pick a fight. That's not
right.
that's not okay.
Okay, so there's one more paragraph in this chapter, and then an entire chapter called The Gift of Magic, which we'll talk about next week. But let me just read this opening to it.
Right.
So Jung has been in this active imagination that we went through at the beginning of the chapter, and he's gotten the three prophecies: the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. And so what I'm saying is, religion is a gift, and it creates community, and we need to respect that. But so Jung has been through this whole active imagination, and now this is what he says: and a horror crept over me. Am I not the tightly bound? Is the world there not the unlimited? And I became aware of my weakness. What would poverty, nakedness, and unpreparedness be without consciousness of weakness and without horror at powerlessness? Thus I stood and was terrified, and then my soul whispered to me. Okay, now what his soul whispered is in The Gift of Magic, and so we'll discuss that next week. But what I wanted to emphasize about this ending of this particular chapter is that Jung realized in horror where he was and the work that he had to do in his lifetime at this point. And he had started to know it in the first chapter, where he said he had to leave everything, his rationality and his scientific method aside, and start to pay attention to the unconscious. That was his assignment for life. It's more than one life's work, as he said. And
get comfortable with the not knowing.
Right. And so oh my God, he looks at what happened when his soul started to speak to him. And you can imagine, try to envision, here's this almost 40-year-old psychiatrist sitting at his desk with his pipe, handwriting out, because he doesn't even have a typewriter at that point, handwriting out what his soul is telling to him, this intuition that's coming up from his unconscious. And it's pretty impressive what he came up with in this one evening. Maybe it was a couple hours that he was writing on this. And then he goes back and looks at it with horror and says, oh my God, this is the way we are. This is the way I've been, and so on. And he doesn't yet realize that World War I will inevitably come. But already unconsciously he knows, and he's seeing it in his unconscious. He's seeing it in the collective unconscious. And so if you attune yourself to what is really happening in the world, you can see the future very easily. And, I can easily see what the future of the next 100 years will be, for example, in terms of civilization and developments. For example, I can very easily see the outcome of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which, regardless of whether there's a peace treaty that people sign, it won't be over until it's over. And in the end, the Ukrainians will never accept the Russians because of what Stalin did to the Ukrainians 100 years ago. Okay, and so that's not often talked about. It's covered in a movie, a 2019 movie called Mr. Jones, and I urge you to see that movie because you will understand clearly and unequivocally why the Ukrainians will never relent. Okay, they may stop fighting, they might sign a peace treaty, but it won't be over until they're satisfied, and they're not going to be satisfied if the peace is made at the cost of giving in to the Russians. It's not going to happen.
On a sidebar, what I find interesting too, Jung is 38, and creatives between 36 and 39, and just general population by around age 42, there's the quote unquote midlife crisis. But I find that is quite an inaccurate misnomer, because what's really happening is that at adolescence, the child became the parent of the adult, who then birthed into their life. But at that point, what happens astrologically, Neptune, expansiveness, boundarylessness. What happens, it doesn't have any sense of itself. It's just the ocean that's infinite and always over the horizon. Nothing is so specific. Except at 42, transiting Neptune squares, 90-degree angle, your natal Neptune. What happens then is that's a strong architectural bracing angle. It's a clear sight off to the side. South sees east, basically. And what happens is then Neptune sees itself for the first time, and the responsibility becomes you self-induce your own rite of initiation into the passage to birth the rest of your life. And he was right there tracking out of being in the trenches of psychiatric hospitals into, now I'm going to move into this 20-volume Balogun series, except maybe not with those words, but he naturally then leaned into the dissonance and began the passage into birthing the rest of his life. And that's right there between that 36-7 and 42, which is 6-7 year Neptune cycle. So, you get, and then it goes into division of 84 with Uranus and different aspects, but I won't go into that. But
yeah,
that point is astrologically prominent. I call it the Ebenezer transit. Think Scrooge, Ghost of Christmas Past and reflection. Psychologists often say that 42 is a place where, if you have been a creative, your neuroplasticity takes over and starts to rehardwire your brain your way. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole lot of corroborations right around the age 42, and I love that he was just right there on it.
Hello, Kathy. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Would you like to address some of these issues we've been talking about?
Yeah, just to touch on a few points that I don't really have organized thoughts behind, but keep coming up for me and my spirit's compelled to. First of all, I just want to credit Jung for his bravery and his courage, because I think that in his position, in his time, needing to protect his practice, his reputation, he had so much unverified personal gnosis that his outlet of his art and his writing were deep. I think keys to his survival as a therapist and a man. And then we're looking back on, his works. So we can only guess, whereas he has thrown us all a really good warning that MK1 Dionysus has also repeated in writing, beware of what lies beyond yourself, or else your presumed knowledge will suffocate the life of those who know themselves. And I think that's a great indicator that the individual is the individual, and that while we are here as a collective, we're here as witnesses of each other and to know ourselves. And I think it's really interesting that dark magic came between war and religion, because I could say politics and religion instead of war. And I think a lot of the darkness that shows up in both of those huge facets of all of our lives comes from the fact that politicians and religious leaders know how to use dark magic. And they do it. Not just power.
Yeah.
Not just power, but dark magic. Literally dark magic.
Right.
They are not afraid to wield that wand. And we're living in a time where they no longer hide it. They know we can see them. They know they have a really deep dig into our lives. They know they have momentum. I don't really think they care that we can see them anymore.
Yeah.
They feel bulletproof from us now. And so we're still their witnesses, though, and we have a lot of, so I think there's a distinction to be made between trend analysis and prophecies. Huge distinction to be made there.
Sure.
We can all analyze trends based on our own experience and depending on what our exposures have been. But when you get visions that don't let up, that's not analysis. That's personal gnosis. That's something coming in that, and for me, for example, just one quick snippet example, because Jung was a seer. I can see him. He was a seer. I am a seer. It is scary to be a seer. And sometimes seers will give way, their truth will give way to the acceptance of the masses. We say we don't, Jordan makes his favorite joke, a validation joke. We all need validation, though. We do. We need each other. We need to be witnessed by each other. We want the validation. It's a heart need. I can say, okay, I don't care. Call me vain. That doesn't bother me. The words don't bother me. I know what I know.
Yep.
And, it was over 25 years ago, I started having the repeated vision of every one of us sitting outside of brick and mortar stores on the sidewalks, everything boarded up and they're decaying, saying, gee, I wish I could go in.
Well,
why was I seeing that long ago? I had no reason for that. There was no trend for that. We were deep in the explosion of all of this retail madness that we have all succumbed to. Why would I see that? That was a vision, and I see it coming to pass. And I find it interesting, not like, I'm a prophet. I'm not a prophet. Okay. I'm not, prophesying. I don't get prophecies, but I think that seers see things and they repeat themselves. So there's been a lot of just really interesting points. I mean, in terms of like the beware of what you think you know about each other. I mean, it comes up in chat. I see it all in times in chat. John T says, you guys mention Jesus a lot, considering his absence in your lives. Judgy much?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I mean, we're here as a collective. I like Jonty's comments, by the way. I think Jonty, I think your mind is really interesting and what you write is really interesting. Amela, I also love your contributions. I'm glad you're showing up right now, and I'm going to be quiet so you can talk before I run out of time, because those are just some of the things I wanted to point out, and I just appreciate the opportunity.
I do want to
Jonty's
just a
point.
minute. I want to address Jonty's point here, where the point is made. You guys mentioned Jesus a lot. I'm not sure the guys in the chat or us guys, but anyway, mention Jesus a lot considering his absence in your lives. And I would simply respond to that he is not absent in my life. Okay. I have no doubt of the existence of the biblical Jesus, okay, because whether or not he physically lived, he is physically a part of our lives and my life every day. And that is true of every human being, probably in the Western world at least, and maybe farther east than that. So it's
And
just
I would
that
agree
I
with that.
see in my life as differently from the way John T is responding there.
Well, and I see Christ as self. And the thing is that Christ to me is, yep, he was a guy and he was a wonderful teacher. And I don't hand myself over to anyone. It's my job to navigate my life. No one else pays the mortgage in my psyche. So I'm not going to hand it over for free to some guru, but I don't find it not in my life. I just find it not a priority, because my priority is my capital S self. And not that that's vain and egomaniacal. It's self-centered, meaning I have a center. And what I love about the chat there is that Jonty, I love repeatedly, you can state your truth, your piece of what's going on and not be judged. And actually, frankly, from my perspective, dignity and difference. I love that there's a format here that Skip provides for people to do that, so that we don't have to get into some squabble. We can disagree and we understand more, to me, how to connect. Because when we all disagree, if it doesn't devolve into conflict, then I learn about you and you learn about me more deeply. And honestly, 6 months from now, I may bark out, hey, Jonty, this piece is confusing me. I know that you have a different perspective. What's your take? And you will provide, regardless, something
Right.
that I never could have. And I think that kind of perspective here is important. So thanks for staying in and commenting.
Yeah. So Amelia, go ahead. You wanted to say something, and then we'll go back to Kathy. Except Amelia has frozen. Okay. Did you want to say something further, Kathy? Here.
I think we're all still really just learning to relate and communicate on a real level too. Like, I mean, we get so spun out, and analyzing
Right.
each other, not just trends,
Right.
but each other. Jung was an analyst. So, people who come here and are attracted to this group are probably kind of analytical thinkers, right? It makes sense.
I suppose. And there's a lot of them.
Oh, Amela's back. You're
So
unfrozen
Amela,
now, Amela.
go ahead. Whoops. We lost Amela, but we got, Amela, go ahead. Can't hear you. You have to unmute somehow. Yep.
She must be having some,
I think internet connectivity.
Yeah.
So Karen, did you want to say something? You have some interesting images there. Karen, can you unmute? Tell us something about what you're showing us. Karen, you need to unmute.
She's laying on the floor with art over her head.
Yeah. So anyway,
or was that the Thoth tarot deck?
well, it was, there was at least one Indian image, but Amela, go ahead. You can unmute and show yourself as well. Amela. Cannot see or hear you at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can, yes.
I apologize for that. I was going to say that you know, each of us interpret things differently, and that's why I love this channel, because you know, in respects to Dr. Jung, who did have a Christian upbringing, he does tend to mention often his spirituality, and you know, he does also in various literature mention spirituality of some of his patients and their psyche and psychic abilities or blockages. And something that I appreciate as a person who was raised as a Muslim is you know, to understand that oftentimes we don't say prophecy because in Islam, we only believe in one prophet, otherwise you're in big trouble. But also, as Jordan says, I do not follow what others tell me, because in my belief, the way in which people interpret any text, whether it's a holy text or you know, a piece of literature, it's deeply personal, and the way that we interpret things is based upon our own perspective of our how we interpret our lives and how we give meaning to what we perceive. So you know, it's completely personal, and I think that's the meat of the analysis. So I was a little bit confused in the prophecy part, but I strongly believe in trusting in your gut instinct is what I say, rather than prophecy, because I can't prophesize, you know, what's going to happen tomorrow or today, or, you know, is my mother going to make pancakes for breakfast when I sleep over, or, you know, I don't know. But, you know, if anyone does have such a gift, well, that's really great. But yeah, I agree. It might also be very scary. And I think that's, again, the beauty of psychoanalysis in Jung's perspective, is in respects to a person's psyche and psychic.
Mm-hmm. I think too, that's a great point too. To me, don't prophesize, don't proselytize.
Yeah.
You know, don't try to convert people either way. And I think that's a good point there, where, you know, your life, your way, you're listening to you. And
we don't control time, actually.
Right.
Okay, while some things can be prophesied, the timing cannot be prophesied. You know, I can say as a prophecy that in 100 years, humanity will have gotten out of the fever dream of our former president. But can I prophesy that that will start happening after the 2024 election? I don't have a clue, because, you know, tricks can happen. We've seen tricks happen before, and you know, so I don't know whether, you know, I would say that I can prophesy that it will be hard to find anybody who will claim that they were a follower of our former president in the future. Will that occur 18 months from now or 40 years from now? I don't know. In part, it depends on the results of the election. But one thing I do know for sure, and this I know, is that enantiodromia works. And so things tend to turn into their opposites, and we see it all the time in our politics, especially today. We're seeing things change right before our eyes, almost.
Well, and there's an Yeah, there's an evolution point too, where instead of back and forth, an anti-adromia pendulum, you become the both
Right.
and you actually navigate with your right and your left foot and your right and your left wing. And the old Native American saying is, I wonder when the white man will learn that the right wing and the left wing belong to the same bird.
That's a good one.
And I
Kathy, did
hate
you
to
have
say it,
another appointment?
I would buy a 500-page book that had that quote right in the middle, because that's worth that much paper.
Sure. Yeah, Kathy, did you have something else to say here about this? Yeah.
Well, I think that, as usual, as is the nature of life, things are brewing on a lot of levels. Yeah.
Oh,
I
absolutely, absolutely.
At this point, politics and current day politics, that's the giant magician in the sky. They're pulling sleight of hand, card tricks, distraction, magic, all kinds of stuff on us.
Right.
And we are falling for it as a collective, for the most part, sadly. When we can get our focus on what it really means to be part of nature as the species of humanity, those tricks and bread and circus shows won't have the same impact on us.
Yeah.
They won't be as motivating. And there's a lot of talk about, our evolution and what does that mean? But, it just starts new arguments. I'm not sure if it's going to get us there.
Surely it does. But here on this channel, I have a lot of experience over the years, going back to 2011, with small things that I did having a big impact.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We all do.
Right. And so the reason I'm here every week, and I'm committed to being here every week, with the exception of the 15th of October, when we'll be in Confluence, is that that the ideas that we present here are ideas which I think will percolate out into society and make a difference.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it's really, really healing. And the tagline on my business as a Pilates instructor is "Shift happens."
Mhm.
Nice pun.
Oh,
Love
that's
it.
a good one. That's a good one.
And we do nothing but change, right? From cradle to grave.
Exactly.
So shift definitely happens, and conscious shift can happen as well as collective consciousness. But as we come together as individuals and share our hearts and our words and our minds and our histories, our stories, our opinions, our perspectives, we are creating a collective. Whether we think alike or not isn't important. We witness each other, and that is energetically powerful. And so what you're doing absolutely is making a difference, Skip. Thanks for holding space. That's what we can do. We can hold space for each other.
Yeah, and we can, if we're convinced that we can, on the invite to the Confluence, I gave the Margaret Mead quote that there's just no doubt that a small group of people can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has, right? And so, Jung thought big thoughts, 100 years ago and more. Obviously he did. And he knew he was way ahead of himself. Even at the time of his death, he was unsure about when the Red Book should be published, because he said, who would understand it? And the answer is, I don't know about anybody else, but I understood it. Okay, he spoke directly to me. And as soon as it was published, I recognized my own experience in that experience. And that was a very powerful thing for me. It hooked me right there.
It's interesting too, Skip. I mean, with Kathy, when I remember when first time I heard someone say holding space, and the architect in me just about screamed and went, and
You're like, there's no structure there.
no. And I got the point, and I said, oh, you mean so you're vesseling? And no, I'm holding space. And I said, that sounds kind of pretentious. And they're like, so we got in this little back and forth. Well, that was 20 years ago. What I love now is when I say I vessel, using it as a verb, it's the same concept. And so what happens is, to me, semantics are just some antics. You know, you find the words that work for you, and I find the words that work for me. And guess what? We're pretty much talking about the same thing. So, you know, instead of splitting hairs of proselytizing the vocabulary, so to speak, I mean, I love that piece where here's the vessel, you know, it's Aquarius, the water bearer. Except the thing is, Aquarius is an air sign. So what gives with the water bearer symbol? But what it is Aquarius knows the magic of condensation and will pour water out of thin air to fill the vessel. So when you say hold space, it just reminds me of these papers I wrote about architecture. It ossifies around the space, and someone says, oh, so you hold space. They just said it because I, you know, get my goat. But then that was then. Now I laugh because we were talking about the same thing, and I was just too attuned to, well, no, these are the right words. And now I'm going, there are no right words. We're singing the same song. So anyway, I'm glad you brought up the holding space, because nice blast from the past for arguments that are longer
I need
arguments.
to draw this to a close, but I want to respond to one thing that Richard said. He said, did Jung even want it published, personal diary? And the answer to that, in my view, and my view only, is that of course he wanted it published. He spent 16 years writing it out in calligraphy and being careful of it in assembling it. So he knew that it contained very powerful information, but he also knew that the world wasn't ready for it. And so he knew its time would come. He maybe overestimated the amount of time it would take.
I think he was, oh, you froze. Yeah, your video froze.
Oh my goodness.
There you go, your video.
Yeah, all right, I'm back again. So Jung, I think, underestimated or overestimated the amount of time it would take before humanity was ready for the Red Book.
And I agree. I think, I wonder,
he lived at a time before personal computers, right? And so that revolution was not even on the horizon when he was living.
I think he was also, I wonder if he was savvy enough, just like he didn't pick arguments with the clergy. He wrote them letters to try to connect. And I think it was a second savvy professional move not to have this World War Jung for people coming out, what's this whole Red Book thing? And oh my Lord, what about this Christ as self thing? And so what happened is he did not allow religion and politics to interfere with his work. So I think the Red Book was just kind of a second, well, no, it'll come out after I'm gone. That way I can still do my work and not be distracted. I mean, I kind of wonder if he had the professional savvy, because he didn't pick fights with the clergy.
Well, and and there are many of us that have been working on what he did for 100 years, for the last century, many, but most notable of those was Edward Edinger, who wrote 17 books interpreting Jung, and he brought it down from where Jung was down to the area where I could start to understand it. Okay, I could start to see what Jung was getting at. And I read a lot of Jung, but when I started to read Edinger, I started to get it. So I urge everyone to pay attention to Edward Edinger and this channel, and now there are many others where we've spawned a movement especially Jordan and me now, because there are many other channels now on YouTube, and so be it. I wish them well that have been doing that. This even the three Jungian analysts who run the website This Jungian Life have started to talk about the tarot now, Jordan, after you and I have been doing it for
Several
6 or
years.
7 years. Yeah. And
Well, it's interesting to
so-
me, instead of just the more the merrier, it's look at all these allied fields in a community that we're creating, all these
absolutely
wonderfully articulate perspectives and doing something about it, not just going with some status quo flow, which is, I mean, my joke is don't, be fluid, but don't go with the flow. Only dead fish go with the flow. And you got to brace up
Right.
against the stream.
And so now I'm hopeful that because of what we're doing with the confluence, I'm hopeful that we will find ways to impact the collective even more radically than before, because even Colleen, who has been doing this for 60 years, working with Jungian collective unconscious ideas in her artwork, she had never done a collaborative project. Okay, she's not, and you see this in the invitation to the confluence. If you watch that 8-minute video, that's usually on top on this YouTube channel right now, and at the confluence23.org, you will see that she's, the penny is dropping with her, that if she does a collage with someone else, that she's going to learn things. And certainly, yes, she's going to learn things. And what I learned from doing the Rocky with the children, I mean, these are all impoverished children, and so I'm just going to put up the Rocky that I did with those kids once again, because it just says so much. And we understand these kids hugely because we can look at this image. And
Skip, why do they call it Rocky?
Well, I have to tell you that there is an entire interview between me and Colleen Kibert.
Okay.
That is recently on this YouTube channel where I discussed it with Colleen, where the name came from. And so you need to take a look at that. And let me see if I can, I don't know if I can capture the, maybe able to go over to.
And I always find it to be a painterly raku. What happens is what's going to happen. And
right.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like, because it ends up looking like bumpy and textury and like a whole terrain and environment in itself and all that. I'm like, I'm on a hike in my mind, in my art mind.
nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and it also looks like the Milky Way if you step back far.
Okay, let's see. Let me do a search here quickly, and I'll give everybody the oh, there it is. Rocky style painting interview. Okay, so I'm going to share with all of you the link. Hopefully, okay, so here's the link about the Rocky style painting. And I'm going to give it to you here on this chat.
Okay, there it is.
Okay, so there's the link.
I'm going to go into that link right away and send that to myself in an email so that I don't forget to watch it.
Right, because that's the video in which I interviewed Colleen on this very topic.
Oh, and I was spelling it wrong in my brain. It's R-A-K-I, not
well,
R-O-C-K-Y.
that,
But I will
that's-
watch a video.
that's an innovation. You'll see.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's talk
You
about
gotta
it next week.
Gotta
Yeah.
get Rocky
Oh.
2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4.
Okay, peace.
All right.
I'm gonna sign off here. See you next week. Bye-bye. Thank you.